Good afternoon, everybody. You caught me doing a little pre-show shimmy there because I'm excited about this one. I really am. I've been doing a lot of studying and research, and I think this is going to be a really interesting discussion. And I hope that you all learned something today. But before anything else, it is Wednesday, February 9th, 2022 at 3 o'clock p.m. And that means it's time for Women in Business. As I said, I'm really excited about the discussion we're having today and my guest. And I'm so thankful to her for suggesting this topic to me because it's honestly one I may not have done had someone not suggested it. But now that it's been suggested, I'm really excited about it. But let me tell you about Juanita, and then we will be off to the races. Trust me, I could talk about this one a lot. Juanita Chapman was born in Washington, D.C. She is the wife of a retired U.S. Marine, a mother of 3 young men, and currently lives in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. Juanita's crafting began at the early age of 8 years old. Both her mother, an accountant, and grandmother, a seamstress, taught her how to sew and crochet. She was taught to craft both for enjoyment and to save cost. As a teenager, Juanita, like most teenage girls, had a passion for fashion. Let's bring her in. Hi, Juanita.
Well, hello. Hello.
Thank you for being here. And thank you for suggesting this topic because, like I said, you got me revved up now. I know.
That's
See,
okay.
this is where motor mouth starts going, and you have to kind of go, okay, take a breath. You're good. But what I want to start with is the history of Black people and crafting, because like I told you before the show started, I did a bunch of reading because I knew that I didn't know, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So what I found is that in a way, the fact that a lot of Black people who were in slavery were the original crafters has kind of been erased. I mean, I found out that people who were bringing Black people over to be slaves or who were buying slaves were buying from certain areas because those people had the skill sets already. Yes. I did not know this.
Yes. It goes back, and this is February, as we know, and It is Black History Month. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really a good place to start with all of this. There's a theme every February, which a lot of people are not aware of. Every February, there's a theme for Black History Month. And this year, it is Black Health and Wellness. Ooh. And the theme basically is considering activities, rituals, initiatives that the Black community have done to be well. Mm-hmm. So one might ask, well, where does that fall into crafting? Oh, it falls into crafting because back when there was slavery, crafting is something that African Americans did, that the Black community did to deal with the environment in which they were in, to deal with slavery. Mm-hmm. They craft, they built, quilts, quilts that told stories and things of that sort. They gathered together and they utilized the resources that was available to them. Now, I'll tell you that when we talk about looking at Black historians, my watch has decided to join us in this conversation.
That's all right.
But one person in particular, there's several. I mean, we could go all day, but when I think about quilting, for example, so quilting is something that I just recently started to pursue. Mm-hmm. I think it's an amazing craft. But when I look at the history of African Americans and how quilts were used and how they were developed, Harriet Powers in particular comes to mind. She is considered the mother of African American quilting. Mm-hmm. She was born a slave in 1837 in Clark County, Georgia. Her quilting technique involved applique, which a lot of your
Mhm.
quilters in your audience, I know they're familiar with that. A lot of crafters, even those who do embroidery, are familiar with applique.
Mhm.
But she used that to tell stories, to tell biblical stories, to tell real life stories that were going on. And her quilts were amazing. Now, doing my research, I discovered that many of her quilts she actually sold during hard times. However, there are 2 of her quilts that are actually on display. Um, they're owned by the Smithsonian at this point. They were
Mhm.
sold to the Smithsonian. So you can see her quilts at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and also in Boston.
Oh, cool.
Yes, they're the 2 are the Bible quilt, and the other one is the pictorial,
Mhm.
and they're amazing. So then, as I go on and look at our history, Elizabeth Hobbs Keekley is another one. She was a
Mhm.
seamstress, a dressmaker. You've heard of her, right?
Yep, I know her.
Also a former slave. She was a civil rights activist and an author. If you've ever heard of the book 30 Years a Slave,
Mhm.
or Behind the Scenes, or 4 Years in the White House, because she was actually the seamstress for the First Lady, Mary Todd Lincoln.
Mhm. Yep.
They were actually friends for a bit, I think, until that 4 Years in the White House book came out. It kind of shook things up. Yeah, it kind of shook things up, but
Mhm.
they were friends. And she had very wealthy clients. She had a dressmaking shop in Washington, D.C. Not something that everyone could get, because it was very
Mhm.
hard for African Americans to even have a patent on
Mhm.
things that they would create. One more that comes to mind is Ann Lowe. She's from Montgomery. She was in Montgomery, Alabama. She was also a seamstress. But what's really interesting about her was that she was from a line of seamstress. Her grandmother, who
Mhm.
was a former slave, was a seamstress. She was a dressmaker, as they refer to it. Her mother was known for her embroidery.
Mhm.
Now, Anne Lowe actually designed the dress of Jackie Kennedy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she did her wedding dress. And numerous elite families, such as the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Whitneys, if you've ever heard of them,
Mhm.
and the list just goes on. And it's
Wow.
something that we use most of the time as an ironing board, right?
Yeah.
Sarah Boone, she is known to have been the inventor of the ironing board. However, Christine, I could tell you there are debates about that out there. 'Cause
Mhm.
once again, I told you it was hard for us to get things patented.
Right.
So if you look at the history, in some areas it may say she contributed some ideas. In other areas, it says she was actually the inventor. There's a lot out there, but how does this fall into crafting? How does it fall into that community? It falls into that community because they gather together.
Mhm.
They gather together. They, as in my ancestors and
Mhm.
who were slaves, and many others, this was their way of communicating. This was their way of dealing with the harshness at that time, and the various things that they dealt with. Um, Today, where are we today? Well, that community still exists. We don't
Yeah.
have slavery, of course, but that community of women coming together. And I don't want to leave the men out, because there are some men who quilt, right? There are
Mhm.
some men who craft. Um, we gather together and have some of the best conversations. It's more common down south. Um, I did a survey on Facebook recently
Mhm.
that, if you don't mind me sharing,
Sure,
but
please.
one of the groups that I'm in, I did a survey, and I went out and I asked them where and or who your inspiration to quilt, sew, and craft, where'd it come from?
Mm-hmm.
And the responses I got was grandmother, mom, aunt, aunties in some cases,
Mm-hmm.
aunts, friends, and they share stories of how their grandparents, the grandmother, mom would be quilting, and they would take the scraps of fabric and sit next to them and make their
Mm-hmm.
dog clothes, or do different things with them. So they learned from watching, from being taught.
Sure.
And they experienced the community of stories, having their family members all sitting around while they just
Mm-hmm.
chatted and shared different things that were going on. When we look at health, mental health, it was healthy for them to do that. The other question that I asked was, what, if any, challenges do you face as a Black crafter today? I found the responses to be really interesting. First and foremost, the thing that came out with the teenagers today, because the teenagers today, they like things like this, right? They pick up an iPad, they pick up their phone, and things happen real quick. Well, in the world of crafting, it doesn't always happen that fast. It's a process. Okay, it's a process. I'm not a quilter, but I'm a wannabe quilter, and I'm learning to be a quilter. But I could tell you, just from sewing, from knowing how to sew, there are some things that take time.
Sure.
And the feedback I got is that there's a challenge in getting our young folks to sit down and to embrace the craft and to learn and to experience the community. Most important, to experience that face-to-face community. The other thing that came out of the survey was that finding authentic, quality, culturally represented fabric, trims, and accessories. When you go to some of the big fabric stores, and even some of the small ones, depending on where you are, you only see African prints and the colors that, represent the Black culture. You only see it in February, if that. In some cases, you don't. But see, the thing about it, though, is that the Black community, we craft all year round. We don't just craft in February. So seeing that out there is something that is a challenge, is an area that needs to be improved. Now, the last one I'm going to share with you is kind of delicate, but I'm going to put it out there because this definitely came through my research. It was pretty strong. Walking into events, walking into fabric shops, not being greeted. There's a lack of inclusion. There's a lack of involvement. People shared how they go to these events and they don't see others that are like them. They don't see presenters that are like them. So it was very, very interesting conversations on Facebook. But these are the three areas that stood out the most, that people, now when it comes to our teenagers, I don't know if we can change that, other than maybe someone coming up with something where we can pull them in. We create an event for them. Even though, at your event, I actually, when I went to it last year, I did see some women there with their daughters and their granddaughters.
Yeah, there were quite a few.
Yeah, and it was amazing. And I was like, oh my goodness.
And I know of other, there's a young man, Jeff Filler's son, Adam, who runs his own hat business, and he's 10. And Alexis Galloway's daughter is doing something too. And, so they are out there. I think we just need to encourage that more. And I think it's like with, Black people or, Latina people or whoever it is, if you see yourself and if you see people doing it, then what we really need is to find a couple of younger crafters that can get on, YouTube and do some videos and show people that this stuff is fun and, it's worth doing. But There's so many things I want to unpack about what you just said. One of the things that I want to hit first, because this is something that I hadn't really understood, I guess, is the idea that there's this whole history of Black crafting and crafts that were done during slavery that's kind of been co-opted a little bit by a narrative that says like quilting came from white colonial women, instead of talking about the fact that a lot of the slaves that came from Africa brought the applique techniques, brought the quilting patterns, all that kind of stuff. So there's this, I don't even know what I want to call it. The only word I can think of is whitewashing. That doesn't sound right.
I
think it is.
I actually think it's just a lack of knowledge. You know what I mean? You have to really sit down. We have to sit down and educate ourselves, to various cultures. But it is really important for people to understand why those African fabrics are so important and so appreciated. We embrace them because they represent our culture. In this during slavery, women would make the clothes that their masters and their, and the wives and the kids would wear. They were made by them. And then as you can see, even coming out of slavery, the seamstress, the dressmakers, the quilters, they didn't stop. They didn't stop that craft. They continued to carry it on, and some turned it into a business, very successful business. And even today, we have Black crafters who have businesses that deal with dressmaking and are a successful seamstress. I just think that we need to bring it in more. We definitely need to bring it in more, as in imagine an event where you have a mixture of folks. You have white crafters, Black crafters, Asian crafters, Hispanic crafters. I actually, Christine, I didn't share this with you in my bio, but I lived in Mexico City, Mexico for 3 years.
Oh, wow.
As part of one of my jobs. And the crafting there is amazing. Once again, you have another history there. The fabrics, the colors are vibrant. And what the Mexican community can do with their hands is just incredible. Incredible. Quilting is just a pinch of creativity. Jumping back to slavery, we had carpenters. Our men could make things, and we still have Black carpenters. But we have to figure out how to, in particular, how to make everybody feel comfortable, I guess. The different cultures that attend these events, everyone needs to feel comfortable. And I think that we have to begin by allowing people to see people that look like them. So with that said, when I attended your event last year and I looked at the flyer and I was like, I'm going to do this. And I tried to get some of my friends to go, but their schedules would not permit. And I said, okay, well, I'm packing up. I'm going by myself. No, I'm not going to know a soul. But I immediately looked and I zoomed into the brochures and I was like, okay, where, I'm looking at the different types of people in addition to the different sessions that will be there, that the presenters and stuff that, I'm assessing all of that. But I will tell you that people they will move faster. They are quicker to buy in to an event when they can connect with it.
Sure.
Yeah. And when I went out there and I had a wonderful time and I met some amazing people. And matter of fact, I have a whole nother set of good friends as a result of going out there. I have people that I can pick up the phone and call and ask for their help when I put something together. But at the same time, I'm like, I want other people to have that experience.
Sure.
So I think that's what brings us here today, is that just to collaborate and to share, and, how do we make this happen? How do we, do we look at advertisements? Do we look at how we promote events?
Well, I think one of the things that struck me about a lot of the conversations, like you said, when you brought up the people don't necessarily feel welcome thing and how delicate that is that we don't talk about this stuff nearly enough, and not in an antagonistic kind of you're wrong, you're right kind, but in a more, okay, this is a thing. There is a history of not talking about Black people crafting. There is a history and a kind of culture now of everybody you see that's depicted crafting or embroidering or whatever, the majority of them, I will say, when I was making the graphic for this show to put up, on social media, I wanted a picture of somebody who was Black, crafting or embroidering or something. The only one I could find, they were making a Kwanzaa card. And I was like, that's not what I want.
Right. Yeah.
But, but that's something, had we not had the conversation, had I not been prepping for this show, I wouldn't have, that wouldn't have hit me the same way that it did, because we had the discussion that we'd had. It's like, you can walk into the same corner of a table for like 20 years because the table's always been there. And then somebody comes up to you and says, why don't you move the table?
Yes.
And you're like, oh my God, I can move the table.
You can.
And it really, and it makes me a little bit annoyed with myself, because I want to be an ally and an advocate and open to all this stuff, but you don't know what you don't know.
That's true. And when you mentioned table, it made me think of one morning at the event, I went down to get my breakfast, and I took it back to a table, and I was sitting by myself. And these two ladies looked over, and I'm friends with them now. One looked over, and both of them looked over, and they were like, oh, no, 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 no. And one jumped up, and she came over, and she said, you cannot sit here by yourself. And I'm like, okay. I can't. And next thing you know, she had grabbed my belongings and was moving me to their table. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm sitting at a different table. And it was a wonderful thing, because when I sat down, and they immediately introduced themselves, and then they said, what's your craft? And I have one of my sublimation cups with me, and I have my logo on it. And they said, did you do that? And we spent breakfast pretty much sharing our crafts and what we do. But you know what? It took initiative. It took for them to just get up and do it. Just make it happen. And I think that that's sometimes what we have to do. Sometimes we fear what we perceive could possibly be the end result, which we don't know. We try to predict the future.
Sure.
And how people are going to react. And you'll find that quite often it's going to be the opposite of what you assumed, or what your perception may have been. It just might be okay. And realistically speaking, yes, there are times when it can be really awkward. For me, I think because I've been around so many different cultures. I mean, my parents were really big on that. They wanted us to be around all different types of people, and they wanted us to educate ourselves. I mean, my mom is like a historian, even telling her about this interview, she was sending me all sorts of stuff. And I was like, okay, Mom, okay. And she's like, you got time, but look at this and look at that. And, but it starts when you're young, one will say, right? But what happens when it didn't start when you were young and now you're older and you think it's too late, but it's not too late. My circle, I'm proud of it because it's mixed with different people. But at the end of the day, I know who I am and I know where I've come from.
Sure.
And I carry people with me from all different backgrounds. So when I went out to the event, I was exposed to so many different things. I didn't even know you could embroider on vinyl. Christine, my mind was just blown. I went into, I have to tell you this, I went into the vendor, where the vendors were that Friday. And I walked in and it was wall to wall vendors. And I said, okay, I love to shop. I'm going to make this happen. I was so overwhelmed because I was like, oh my goodness. Well, what do you do with that? And what do you do with that? I turned around and I walked out. And then one of the ladies told me, they said, go to the sessions first, learn, make your list, and then go back, make a list of what you think you need. So I did that. And then I ended up, fortunately, bought an extra suitcase. I had tons of stuff to take back. Yeah, I spent a lot of money. I was like, how am I going to tell my husband this? I got to justify all this. But I also thought about other people, other cultures, other crafters that could have experienced the same amount of joy that I did, or the presenters. I started thinking about people like Alexis, who's amazing, who's been on social media for a while, and she's just amazing at what she does. I thought about Lisa Watley, to me, who's like one of the queens of supplemation. She's amazing. And I just thought about all these different people just started coming to mind for me. And I said, we have to expand this. We have to get this out here so that more people can come and experience it and appreciate it. And then the folks that I connected with, just being able to share my craft with them. A lot of people didn't know about supplementation.
Right.
And I had a lot of discussions with people about supplementation. I had dinner with wonderful people, so I definitely think that there's work to be done, but I believe we can do it.
Oh, I do too. I mean, I think what I loved about what happened with you when you first reached out to me is it was very much in a spirit of, I had a really great time. I thought it was really cool. Here were a few things that maybe didn't work as well as I would have liked, but we can make this better, and we can bring this experience to more people that are Black or Hispanic or whatever, Asian, whatever it is. And I was like, yes, but that's something that in my little bubble that I live in, I was looking at it and going, oh, this is nice. Yeah. And I was, then not from any desire to not include everybody, I guess assuming, and maybe this is something we could unpack for a minute. I guess I was assuming that it would just happen organically. Okay. But from what your survey tells us, it maybe won't necessarily, because Black people or Asian people or Hispanic people may not be sure that they'll be welcome. So it's incumbent on the people who are doing the thing, whatever the thing is, to kind of make it obvious.
I agree with you. And it's not just limited to events, of course. I mean, even if, if you own a store, and a Black crafter, Asian crafter, Hispanic, whatever walks in, you have to make them feel welcome, and you got to service them just like you service us, just like you service everyone else.
Sure.
I've had people say, well, I don't know where to get those fabrics. I don't know where, I wouldn't know where to begin. Well, you have a whole network on social media of folks who can guide you, who will help you. And speaking of social media, Christine, if you don't mind me saying,
Sure.
During the pandemic, let's talk about that.
Mm.
During the pandemic, I don't know if people realize how many folks jumped into crafting as, once again, we're going back to the mental health part of it, as a way to even deal with the pandemic.
Mm.
And then they discovered a love for crafting. They discovered how to sew, how to embroider, how to do sublimation. They discovered all these wonderful things that they could do that they didn't even realize they could do. And then some of them said, I remember my grandmother used to do this. And I remember, and I didn't, just all the businesses were closed. And I'm sitting there with this sewing machine that my grandmother gave me, and I decided to pull it out. And then I went on Facebook and I joined some groups, and they were actually doing live videos that would teach you how to do these things. And then I realized that some said they had the gift.
I have the gift.
I get the gift,
I love it.
Yeah, and I can do that. So to me, the crafting world just exploded even more during the pandemic, because even when businesses opened back up, they didn't stop. They just kept on going. They're still crafting today. Some people even opened businesses. Some people have Etsy shops, but they never thought of opening an Etsy shop.
Yep. It's very true.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that is really interesting about that whole phenomenon is that a lot of the mental health benefits that we were talking about earlier helped people get through. Crafting gave those to people and helped them get through the pandemic, dealing with trauma or depression or anxiety or whatever it is, just being a distraction.
Yes. Yes.
And also giving you, when you make something, you get a sense of progress, which when we were all shut down and isolated in our little houses, it was hard to see how we were ever going to go forward. So if you could look at a quilt or a mug or whatever.
Yes. And you think about making masks. I mean, elastic was a shortage. Okay. Fortunately, the benefit of having long hair is that you have the little hair bands around.
Sure.
I was using those to make masks, and so were a lot of other people. And I think for sewing, that's really jump started a lot of people on their machines. I did not have an embroidery machine before the pandemic. You couldn't have told me prior to that I would be sitting down at an embroidery machine. I had 2 sewing machines.
Sure.
But now I have 2 embroidery machines.
You've expanded.
I expanded. I have and you know what? I did not want another embroidery machine until I went to your event last year, and they sat me down. I don't have a Luminaire. I want one, but I it's okay. I have a Meridian. I'm very happy with. But when they sat me down at that Luminaire, I was like, okay, I need this in my life. I need this in my life. I told my husband that, and he's like, I can meet you halfway. We'll just, what's in the middle? What's in the middle? So I'm not the only one, who ventured into that.
Oh, sure.
But in particular, our focus today, when looking at the Black community, there are a lot of us out there who do that as well. So how do we bring it all together once again? How do we have that inclusion? How do we guarantee that? Your event last year, you had some young women who were selling, I think, sublimation paper. And I have tons of sublimation paper, and they had other sublimation products and stuff. But I ended up purchasing from them just to support them. But as I walked through the venue, and I didn't see anyone else who looked like me as a vendor, but I admired the quilts and the different crafts and the bags and all the different ideas. One woman had towels and all these ideas that you could do with
Mhm.
towels. And then I couldn't help but to think, mix the other cultures into this, because the Black community has some amazing quilts, as
Mhm.
does the Latin community, as does the Asian community. Mix it in, and man, you have
Mhm.
something extraordinary on your hands.
Well, and I think getting a more diverse vendor group is going to help everybody, because number one,
Mhm.
it signals to people who are Black or Hispanic, or that, hey, we have people like you selling at this show or giving a class at this show.
Mhm.
And I think that, and I just think one of the things that I took away from a lot of the research that I did before we were having this conversation now, was that you can't just say that you support this. You
Mhm.
can't just say, oh, I really wish there was more diversity. If you are a person who looks like me, you have to actually do things. And that's and that's the part that it sounds like, well, duh, but that's the part that's a little hard sometimes, I
Mhm.
think,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
you don't want to, how do I put this the right way? See, this is where I've gone off on a tangent now, and now I'm trying to think how I want
It's
to phrase this.
okay.
You don't want to intrude almost, or you don't want to assume that, you know, the white lady needs to save the day, basically, because that's not what this is about. But
Yeah.
there has to be a recognition of the fact that just by virtue of the color of my skin and the visibility in the industry, there are things that I can do. Does that make sense?
It makes a
Did I
lot of
say
sense.
that right?
You did. Yes, you hit the hammer on the nail. I kind of look at it as, you're the woman with the power, right? I'm not coming to you with just a problem, right? I'm coming to you with a solution.
You
So,
did.
yeah, and with that solution came also, hey, I'm here for you. What do you need me to do? You need me to volunteer? You need me to make that presence? I'm there. So that's a big thing. It's like, if I walk into a store, as I said before, and they say, I don't know where to find the fabric. I don't know how to find that fabric that you desire. Okay, well, let me help you. I know of some sites. I know of some vendors.
Mm-hmm.
I know of some people who can provide you with that. Let me give you their name. Let me give you their number, and you
Mm-hmm.
can reach out to them. I know they'll help you. So we all have a responsibility. We can't just sit back and say, well, there's this problem. There's
Right.
lack of diversity. Well, okay, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do
Mm-hmm.
to help make change, to help bring about change?
It's a good question. And I think the other thing too, and we talked about this a little bit before the show too, and I've talked about it with other people as well, but there's also the concern that you're going to get it wrong somehow,
Mhm.
that you're going to say the wrong thing, that you're going to do the wrong thing, that you're going to come off as, an idiot or racist or whatever it is, when you're not really intending that. And what you told me, and what I've been told by others, is that, if you're not sure, or if you're uncomfortable with something, if you're not sure of the terminology, or you're not sure if you should say the thing that you want to say or whatever, just be honest about it. Just ask.
Yes. Yes. And how you ask is very important. If you suspect that there's this possibility that you may offend, then you put that out there in the beginning. I
Mm-hmm.
have a question, but I don't want to offend you. But I just feel the need to ask. So please,
Right.
don't take it personal. I won't go into the details, but as you know, when I attended the event, I was asked a question,
Yeah.
and when I think about it, I know of many people who would not have taken it very well. But I looked at the full picture, and I
Mm-hmm.
knew that the question was being asked not out of spite. It was being asked out of curiosity. And there was a certain level of what I would say, I guess, some ignorance and,
Mhm.
innocent ignorance. Is that such a
Sure.
thing?
No,
It
I
was
think
it was innocent. And I gave a response. I, I'm an instructor as well,
mhm.
part-time. I'm an adjunct faculty member at a university. So educating is definitely something
Sure.
I jump in that mode real quick. And so I'm thinking, oh, here's an opportunity to educate about my culture. Here's an
Which I
opportunity
love that.
to clarify,
Mhm.
versus because this happened during a time where a lot of people were on edge. We had a lot of protests going on,
Mhm.
Black Lives Matter, very active, George Floyd, that, our community was really hurting.
Mhm.
And we still hurt today, but that's a whole nother topic, but we still hurt. And so someone else may not have received that very well. They may
Mhm.
not have responded very well, but I looked at it as an opportunity to educate, an
Mhm.
opportunity to create some awareness and at the same time provide some clarification on one, what it means to be Black,
Mhm.
what Black Lives Matter is about, because there was a lot of confusion about it, and it was brought to the event, and one person had that boldness
Mhm.
that you're talking about, and they asked the question, and they deserve the answer,
Right.
and we're friends, we're friends. There was a connection made there
Mhm.
just by them just stepping up and saying, hey, can I ask you this question?
Right.
So
Well, and I think that we all need to be asking more questions, honestly,
mhm,
because there's a culture in this country of all that stuff is in the past and we don't need to talk about it anymore. And it's like, but it's not. And we do, because the only way you heal from any trauma is by talking about the implications of it and what it means and
mhm.
who's responsible where and all that, and we kind of just want to go, well, it was all in the past and boy, that was really sad, but now we're great.
Yes, yes, and we're not. I mean,
Mhm.
it's and you don't know people's background. You don't
Right.
know their stories. You know what I mean? And I just think that it's important to educate. It's just really important. Um, in the crafting community, when we get into that, as we are into it, there's a lot of education involved.
Mhm.
I admire all of the crafters who are leading the way, and they do
Mhm.
these live videos and they're teaching us. And you buy, like, for example, when I bought my machine, I didn't just buy a machine. I bought from someone who said, um I don't I and can I say their name or their business
Sure,
name?
go ahead.
So I bought my machine from Gloria Horn, and she's
Mhm.
here in Pittsburgh. So I'm proud of that because her audience is huge, and
Mhm.
her organization. The thing about them is that you don't just buy a machine. We teach you how to. We want you to
Mhm.
know how to use the machine. So she does these videos every week,
Mhm.
multiple videos, and her staff does them. And I'm like, I didn't just fork out money on this machine, but I'm also learning. I'm learning.
Mhm.
So when someone else in my community, when they get the same machine, I'm like, oh, I know how to do this. I know how to do it because Gloria Horn's staff and herself, she was giving me a one-on-one, has taught me how to do it.
Mhm.
So we need a community like that where we're not afraid to teach one another. We're not afraid to share our crafts.
Mhm.
We're building one another up and not pushing one another down. Those connections a lot of times come through events like the one you had last year. That was my first time attending. And my husband would probably say she just wouldn't shut up when she came back. She just wouldn't be quiet. I'm trying to sleep and she's still talking about the event. And, and I'm like, well, you're going to have to learn terminology because this is my life.
Yeah, this is a thing now, buddy.
This is a thing. And you benefit from it because I make you things. So education, experience, exposure, inclusion, just pulling people in and making them part of the big picture. I actually envisioned for your event, I see that diversity coming. I know it's coming because I, for one, I put my hand up. I'm going to be one of those folks who are there. And I'm going to be one of those folks who's putting it out there. You need to go to this. You need to be part of this.
Well, and that's, what you did for me was just really made me think a little differently. Because I told you, because we had a little chat before we started, I said, I'm going to be really honest. My goal is always to fill the show floor. That's my job. I need to get vendors in so I can get attendees to come so the event can make money. But now I'm thinking about it a little differently, and I'm trying to be a little more strategic about, okay, who can I recruit that is, maybe Black or maybe Hispanic or maybe Asian, or, how can I give some of those people a place to connect with people who they may not otherwise get to be in front of,
Yes.
And that's another thing that, is something that the industry needs to parse out in general, I think. And that could be crafting, it could be commercial, whatever it is that, you see, and I've said this a million times before, so no one who watches this show is going to be surprised. You see the same 10 old white guys doing seminars everywhere. And, and a lot of the people who are, and I'm not knocking any of the people who, as you said, who are doing the videos and doing the teaching, they're doing an amazing job. It would just be great if people who are Black or people who are Asian could see people who are of their ethnicity doing the same things.
Yes. And when you have those individuals in those positions, in those spots, like, for example, if I said I was presenting somewhere and I put that out, then my friends are going to come to support me. So that brings that diversity in.
I am half thinking of ways to figure out how to do a panel or something on this topic at AG. And if I do, I'll be knocking on your door because
I'm there.
This is important.
Yeah.
And I think the more that we talk about this and the more that we put it in people's heads that, hey, this is something you need to think about. And even if you think you have zero power to do anything about this, just let the showrunner of the show that you go to know that, hey, there's this Black crafter, or there's this Black embroiderer, or there's this Asian quilter who's really cool. And I'd love to see that person at your show.
Yes. Yes.
Well,
because, when I was in Dallas, all I could think of was, this is Texas. There are so many crafters in this area. Black, Asian, white, of course, obviously. There are so many. So I think that pulling in those individuals, pulling in, and it might mean attending events. There's sometimes in Pittsburgh here, I will go to events or even participate in events just so I can network. I might know ahead of time that the turnout for buyers, or people who are coming, depending on where I'm located, it might not be a big turnout. But then I move to thinking about, well, who's going to be there?
Yeah.
And those are the folks that I want their cards. I want to know, how did they do it? I want to know, oh, how many events have you done? And I want to know what their craft is. And then I keep their cards. And when I know of an event that I think they should be participating in, hey, do you know about this? I might send them an email, or I might follow them to an event, or I might tell them I'm going to be at an event. One of the things I did find out from networking is that there are actually groups on Facebook that announce events for vendors. And you can actually go on there, and people can go on there, and as they do, and they say, I'm doing this event, I need vendors and blah, blah, blah. And they will screen, like they don't want all their vendors to be selling shirts or, doing the same thing. So they kind of screen, they'll do private messages and ask people, well, what's your craft? What do you do? That's another platform that can be used to get more of a diverse, participation, more diverse audience.
Well, and that's part of the job of the shows. And I had this, I'm kind of in my head a little bit laughing, because I had a discussion similar to this about women speaking at shows. And I, at that time, was still in my old job, and I put something out on social media similar to what you did. And I said, hey, shows, how do women who want to speak at your show get to be able to do that? And I was really shocked, because almost all the shows, the commercial shows, replied to me and said, here's how you do it, and here's how we pick our speakers. And I was like, okay, so, but the other half of this too, and I have to say this, is that if we want things to be different, then you have to step up and support the people who are trying to make things different.
Absolutely.
This is an interesting comment. I want to put this up.
Okay.
Kim says, I do feel like that in the last few years, in the sublimation world anyway, that there are more and more vendors of other races, and they are becoming a bigger presence on social media. Hopefully these vendors will start appearing at the trade shows. Well, I will say, if you know of vendors who are in sublimation or anything that are, that would be a good fit for Applique Getaway, please reach out to me and let me know who they are, because I'm doing my research and I now have a list, and I've reached out to some of these people, and I will reach out to more. But, the other half of this too is that if I'm a Black vendor or a Hispanic vendor and I've never heard of Applique Getaway, I've never heard of me. I don't know who you are from a hole in the wall. You're just some random lady who sent me an email and said, hey, we'd like you to come to our show.
Yes.
So it's kind of the circle of life thing. If you don't know who I am and I reach out to you, are you going to want to do my show unless you know who
Right. Yes. And that's, to me, that's where that network comes in.
Yeah.
It's just like when you ask for recommendations. There are some people that I reached out to prior and said, hey, remember the event I told you about, that blah, 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 blah. It's coming up again. And, I'm trying to assist with finding vendors who, do this, that, and gave them some history, because you're absolutely correct. You could walk out there and say, hey, I want you at this event. And they're like, who are you again? And what do you do?
Yeah. And why do I want to come to this event?
And why do I want to come? Yeah. And then even just expanding, I love the comment that the one person wrote. It actually made me think of other areas, such as, and we're talking about sublimation. There's also people who deal with epoxy, do epoxy cups and other things, and molds and things of that sort.
Sure.
You got a huge network of Cricut users. I'm a Cricut user. Cricut, that even falls into the sewing and embroidery field as well, because you can cut fabric depending on the Cricut that you have. We use vinyl with embroidery at times, which I learned at your event.
Yeah.
I my favorite vinyl was the glow in the dark vinyl. I have to tell you, back with that. I said, oh yeah. So that's exciting. And you know what? The folks that I bought stuff from and I've made things with, I've had people in the group say, well, where'd you get that vinyl? Where'd you get that? And I pull my business cards out from your event. and I give their contact info.
Sure.
So that's helping their business.
Mm-hmm.
So it would also help, we get more diversity. We're also going to help the Black community. We're going to help
Sure.
the Asian community, Hispanic community, and so on and so forth. And everyone wins.
Yeah.
And everyone
Well,
wins.
and that's the end. I mean, obviously the end goal is to have the best show we can have.
Absolutely.
But my belief is the best show we can have is a show that reaches out to the most people. So,
Yes.
and has the most diverse vendor population and the most diverse attendee population we can get. Because then, like you said, then we all win.
Yes.
Now, I mean, how we get to that point, that's a long and involved conversation. But I think, and I hate to say it, but we're getting pretty close to the end here. Goes fast.
It does.
It really does. But I think conversations like the one we had here today, and the fact that people were here listening to this conversation and maybe learning something from it is a good place to start.
Yes.
I mean, I think the thing that we need to remember, though, and this is something that I bang my head against a lot, is that you can't just be one and done with these things. You have to keep talking about it. And I have to say, I do have a platform in a bunch of different places, and you've given me a lot of ideas for things that I can take to other people and say, hey, what if we did this? What if we had a panel at this show? Or what if I wrote an article for this thing? Or, so this is the start of a lot of conversations, and be ready, because I may be hitting you up to come talk at some places. So.
I'm there for you. I would just challenge our business owners out there to just expand that inventory, and if bring some diversity into your shop, and then when other people walk in that you just don't normally see, just embrace them. I'm big on customer service. I don't like bad customer service, and most of the time when I return to a store where I get bad customer service, and I'm not saying our business owners on this show or listening to this show are bad. I'm just saying in general, a lot of people will not return who are like myself, and we have, we don't have no problem with spending money like I do. If I see something I wanted and I'm getting good customer service, the likelihood of me buying it is pretty strong.
Sure.
But I want to feel welcome. I want to be greeted. And I want to see products that, are not just, business owners have the right to buy what they want in their stores. But what is the purpose of having a business, especially in crafting, if you don't want to meet the needs of various buyers?
That's very true. There's a lot of cultures out there. Make sure that you're representing everything that you can. I really hate to say we have to go, but we have to go.
Yes, it's been
because
a pleasure.
I know what will happen is I'll bring up something else, and then pretty soon we're half an hour beyond where. But Barbara says, great conversation and ideas from both of you. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you for joining us. I really love that you were here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Juanita, for suggesting this and spending this time with me. It really, like I said, you fired me up. So beware, because things are going to happen.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. And we'll be talking, I'm sure.
Oh, we will. And thank you, everybody else, for being here. I'm just going to say, come back next week. We will have a guest, and it will be great. And this was so fun. All right. I'm going to hit end broadcast now, or I'm going to babble for another 10 minutes. All right. Bye, everybody.